Three, two, one. We think it is very clear in this motion that there is no hypothetical paradise in which we win all words. Obviously, we're going to sacrifice some communities in favor of others. This being in mind, we basically need to show you how we can choose a community that is not only more needing in the status quo, but we can actually effectively change its reality more effectively. If both communities are in need, in our case, we mainly say that it is mostly the LGBTQ and on the other hand, mostly women's rights and women's situation in Bangladesh. Basically, if we show that there is less effectiveness in changing the reality of LGBTQ and more effectiveness in changing the reality of mostly women and people in general, then we think it is better to do where it is most effective. Obviously, there is a sacrifice. We're just saying that it is a sacrifice worth making, right? Basically, what we're going to say is, first of all, prove to you why it is likely that people will leave this site if these videos are not being taken out, why these videos are so important for the society in general and women especially, and generally and lastly explain to you why we think the weighing in both sides weighs in our favor. My partner will discuss about how even putting that aside, it is still for the safety of the managers of the site, it is legitimized and a good decision for them to make an assessment that prioritizes their own safety over some kind of a social cause that they need to promote, right? So before I move on, any clarification or anything as such? Very good. So I'm going to move to my first point. Why is it likely that they will leave? First, we need to understand about Bangladesh. It is that it is an extremely conservative country, right? So let us understand that all right, so ideas, right, LGBTQ ideas are not very popular even in the West. They are not very well understood even in the West, and there are many people even in the West that oppose to it strongly. We need to understand now, take this perception of our Western world and multiply the lack of willingness to participate in those ideas in Bangladesh, it is 10 times fold. Second, we need to understand is that the other content in this site is not deemed as important, right? First of all, they have a sense that they can teach you maybe how to all of these life skills. They have this sense that religion is far more important than this general life knowledge. And lastly, they basically say that if I take you out from this site, you're basically going to be equal to everyone else in this country. They don't feel like they're doing that much of a harm to you if they tell you not to go to this site anymore, right? So basically what would happen at this point is that the extremist group will paint it as total infidelity, total betrayal of religion in a very religious country, that even participating in the site and continuing to support it, even if you don't watch these videos, even if you don't support the ideas in these videos, is still very, very problematic. It's still a betrayal that you should not convey. And we think by that, a very religious country will be convinced many of its citizens to actually leave the site. Why is this important? Basically, we think this is important because Bangladesh is a relatively poor country with not as good an education system as the West, and with people working many, many hours in order to fund their house incomes. They don't have the ability to teach their own sons, to teach their own daughters all of these life skills, and the school system fails to do that and teach its basic school ideas at the same time. We think a lot of times children are being forced to work in order to cover for the family's income, and therefore they don't have the privilege of actually going to school and learning there. We think for all these reasons, the idea of a site that gives you 10-minute videos that you can watch on your phone on the way to or from work, or when you're at home and with your family, all of these sort of things is very, very important in order to improve their life quality and their education, which we think is generally good. Now, this is, first of all, what I'm saying now is important to Bangladesh as a whole. It applies both to men and both to women. LGBTQ people that still need an education and still need a better life and still need all of these things. What we're basically saying is that this benefit applies to all of the groups, right? But we think it specifically applies to women, and we're going to weigh them because we think if we prove it on them, obviously we prove it to the rest of society, and we basically win this debate. This is the hardest case. Before I continue, CO, do you have a point of information?
Hi. We understand that many people in Bangladesh are Muslim, but could you characterize for us how individuals and different communities in Bangladesh interact with their faith? Thank you.
how individuals and community, basically the idea is that usually a very religious society is kind of led by the idea of religious role models, religious leaders, etc. We think those usually tend to favor more in the side of religion over like the side of like the West, for example, or definitely the general media and you know, websites such as this, which is why we think they're going to lean more towards traditionalism and more to steer away from this website as a whole. Now, why is this important that we, in the context of this debate? Let's first understand that there are other organizations that can support the gay agenda and support consent and do it by themselves. They don't need the 10-minute site in order to do that and improve it and convey it to the entire society. Why is this important? First of all, because they can target more willing participants and they can target different messages to according to how strict you are, according to how religious you are, according to how acceptive you are. We think this is by itself is probably the most effective in promoting the gay agenda over the 10-minute site. So we think the 10-minute site is not that important to the gay agenda. Second, they have the ability to do more at-length programs, which basically comes to say that any delta that OO is going to tell us about this site regarding the LGBT rights or consent or all these very Western modern ideas, we think it will be a lot more effective, and most of its effectiveness doesn't come from the 10-minute site, but rather from outside sources. So basically at this point, we think we need to choose our bias in consideration to the 10-minute site. Right? So we're saying we can do away with this because this site is aimed specifically at education. It doesn't need to also promote gay rights. Right. So what is the reality today to women in Bangladesh? A lot of times they can't choose their husband, let alone act on consent. Even if they want to act upon it, a lot of times they don't have the law to support them or officials that will be able to actually put it into court or anything at that. At this point, we think, let alone gays that usually don't get the support, even like let a gay person that is beating on the street to come to the police and ask for help. Obviously, they're not going to get that. So we think at this point, any idea about promoting like awareness is not really going to help them. But when women are prosecuted for the mere act of seeking education, and when kids are being forced to go into to work, these that we can actually give them education. If we have it on their phones, if it's always available, if they can do it 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there when they can apply, and therefore they can actually improve their life and learn more. For all of these reasons, I beg you to propose.
We thank the speaker for their fine speech. And would like to welcome the leader of opposition. Here, here.
Can everybody hear me? That's fantastic. Okay. Kowtowing to extremists is incredibly dangerous, both for vulnerable people within Bangladesh, but also for your perception as an organization. I'm going to have 2 points. Firstly, about how these videos are massively efficacious and they bring about good impacts, and secondly, on precedent and public perception. So firstly, in terms of these videos being efficacious, firstly, these videos are seen by a lot of teenagers. I think a lot of these children who are engaging in educational activity, firstly, have like a lot of online autonomy, right? So there is a limited amount of numbers in a day in which a parent can sit over your shoulder and look at what you're doing, right? So insofar as you want to engage in like looking at these things, you freely can do so, even though your parents are not necessarily looking in. I also think you have capacities like incognito sites, stuff like that. If you know that your parents are particularly like very Muslim and they're likely to disagree with this. I think particularly like there is a trend of secularization when it comes to children like all over the world, and particularly in Bangladesh, people are not like disproportionately like as children not likely to be extremist Muslims because of belief in secular ideas, etc. So I think that if there is some sort of oppression, it's coming from parents, but I think that that's unlikely to work given that this content is online. So who sees these things? I think firstly, like teenagers that are directly affected by this, right? Like if you're an LGBT teen and you're struggling with depression, etc., you're likely to seek informational content about this. But I also think that it is true that because this is an educational platform, so there are like a lot of people involved, you're likely to get a lot of fence sitters, right? People that would never have come across this information because they were there to look up a chemistry video or whatever, and they ended up on like an autoplay playlist about consent. The response and the stuff that we have here in opening government is that these citizens are very likely to leave very little analysis on why this is actually likely to be true, or people are likely to listen to these groups. My interaction with this is as thus, like, extremists are by definition people that don't have the majority position within society. I think that there are a lot of people like within Bangladesh and like Bangladeshi Muslims that are like significantly more tolerant than this of LGBT identities. I think it's massively reductive to say that this is like the majority of this society, particularly also because they themselves say that religious leaders are the ones that are going to be propagating this message if this is done through religion. And I think these religious leaders are particularly aware of the backlash that religion has been experiencing in Bangladesh and just generally, where teenagers are definitely more skeptical of religious authority, etc., which means that they want to dissipate the stereotypes that religion and Islam is particularly extreme, which means that they're very unlikely to echo the calls of these extremist organizations. These extremists remain on the fringes. Nobody listens to them. I don't think that that this is well proven. I think I've tackled that. Now, secondly, these videos are needed because they say, right, there is a lot of other content. So why is this particularly relevant to be done by this organization and not others? Firstly, this is done in Bangladeshi, right, in native languages, which means that there is no requirement for you to understand English in order to access this information. Secondly, I think that particularly because it is a Bangladeshi organization, it is able to contextualize and reconcile a lot of aspects of people's identities with stuff like consent and stuff like LGBT issues. I think that they are being particularly targeted by this because they are like tackling things about the Muslim faith as well and reconciling ideas about like what the Quran says and also like your sexuality. And I think that's massively important because that then isn't fulfilled by some any other random YouTube videos. They are particularly efficacious in catering to these teenagers that have a lot of problems. What are the impacts of this then? Firstly, I think that more people learn about consent and about LGBT issues. I think that then you're likely to see like less sexual assaults, which and less adverse mental health effects because like LGBT teens have their identity affirmed. They see their identity as being something more normal. There is somebody that talks to them about the concerns that they're having, etc. I think that the framing in opening government saying that just because like forced marriages exist in Bangladesh, therefore there is no possible good impact from this is a bit extreme and outrageous. That is not how Bangladeshi society looks like overall. And even if it were, I think that these trends are already changing, right? And I think that that 10-minute 10-minute learning has a like integral part in playing in this change, right? Like people that are extreme can be convinced to be less extreme via these videos, particularly because they're also framed as educational, right? Like they're not framed as ideology. They're not trying to persuade you. That is not a political actor that is telling you this, but rather in an educational setting, in a non-controversial setting where people are trying to expose information to you. So I think it's likely to be efficacious for fence sitters for that reason. Cool. Why does this set a very dangerous precedent? I think firstly, other organizations that are less experienced and more anxious about the type of backlash that they could be receiving at the moment where they create like progressive content is likely to mimic the actions of like 10-minute learning at the moment where they see where they see them like kowtowing to extremists. I think this is potentially dangerous because then that cuts off like any other alternative of having this type of particularized content for people in Bangladesh, right? Like if all these other organizations see this big one like conceding to extremists, I think that you are for a very, very significantly long time not likely to see any good content or any good educational content for this because of fear that that if they stand up, like these people couldn't stand up, why could we? Secondly, I think that this makes these groups become significantly more aggressive because they expect these tactics to work in the past and they have worked in the past. It means that they're going to push even further in terms of the boycotting that they do. CG before time runs out.
Sorry. Obviously, people are going to get off of the website. What do you think will happen when people do this?
I don't think that this is obvious, and I think I've already already portrayed to you why these extremists are not people that people listen to, specifically not teenagers that this content is targeted at, and just generally, yeah, that wasn't a great view. Cool. So these groups are going to become significantly more aggressive, which means that this has a broad ripple effect in the quality of LGBT education and content education of this type in Bangladesh. And I think this is likely to be something that pervades and that it remains there for a very long time. So if in the meantime Bangladeshi society then becomes more progressive, which is likely the trend, then these content platforms are still going to be very, very scared to do these types of actions because of the platform that 10-minute learning has and the type of precedent that this is setting. I think that these videos have a very, very large potential to help, and they're unique in the ways in which they tackle these issues. We're denying these people very beneficial impacts that opening government don't tackle. Thank you. Oppose.
We thank the speaker for their fine speech. I would like to welcome Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Cool. All right, 3, 2, 1. So I'll start with rebuttal from what we get from OO. Later on, I'd love to take CO for their extension if they would like to. All right, so let's start with to clarify one thing. Yes, mostly extremists are extremists in their opinion, and most people, most Muslims, won't listen to extremists. However, on these specific issues, these extremists talk as most of the Muslim tellings say, which means that specifically on LGBT rights, specifically on very, very progressive gender equality as more Western gender equality, the Islam has a very clear view, at least according to 90% or 99% of the muftis in the Muslim world, which mean that exactly on these points, these Muslim extremists can go and tell all the other community, look, you see why we told you these were dangerous. You see why these Western liberal ideas are very dangerous, because they lead us to all these things that you know are wrong, that you know are not prohibited by our religion, that you know are very clearly condemned by Quran. We think that what the right process should be, is for us to give a lot of for these platforms to talk about a lot of other more basic rights, which are much more which come a lot before these things, which do not collide with Muslim teachings, and thus the community can then put aside these extremists, not listen to them, and still cooperate with these ideas, and in fact can discuss these ideas, can object to the extremists, and so on. So what do we mean by that? In most Muslim countries, let alone homosexuality is not talked about, sexuality itself is not talked about, which means that in order for us to even talk about homosexual rights, we need to talk about sexuality of people. These things, although discussed in Quran, are not discussed in Muslim communities. And we think that these things should be discussed a lot sooner, before people to be able to be more accepting of these rights, because they do not collide directly with any of their Muslim teachings, and for them to be able to accept more liberally advanced rights. We think that although Quran does not talk about gender equality, and in fact, in many cases, a lot of muftis think this does not go along with Quran. Quran does talk a lot about women's rights, and thus, if we have these kind of videos on these platforms, if these platforms are still accepted as they are, and we have these kind of videos talking about the right to education, which is clearly discussed in Islam, talking about the right for women to go to work, which is discussed since the Prophet Muhammad's wife was actually a businesswoman, then these things, then when people talk about these things with extremists, they will have a lot more knowledge to be able to discuss these things. They will have a lot more knowledge to be able to defend their point of view, and thus make a much stronger dialogue in the community, and thus advance a lot more rights. On your side of the debate, they will have to defend LGBTQ rights based on a 10-minute short video that they have probably no knowledge of. They don't have access to a lot of more information, as you say, and thus they won't be able to discuss these rights. They will probably be enclosed in themselves and not talk about them, because they're not able to defend these ideas, because they get a lot of backlash of the community. Yes, most of the community is not extremist, but most definitely most of the Islamic community does not accept homosexual rights. We have Islamic communities in much more liberal countries which do not which do not allow for this, then most definitely not in Bangladesh. In Turkey, which is a lot more of a liberal country, still homosexuality is a big no. Even in Muslims in Israel are now boycotting a lot of companies because of their support to LGBTQ rights. So we think most definitely communities in Bangladesh, the non-extremist people, still won't be supportive of these ideas. And then it will be much more possible for extremists to associate these ideas with other liberal ideas that these platforms provide, with the right of women to education, with the right of women to work, and so on and so on. We think that these platforms will be able to provide a lot more good things if they're not boycotted, if they don't have backlash against them, and if they don't have all of these things. What do we mean by that? So other than discussing women rights, sexuality issues, discuss not other basic women rights, we think they can give a lot of tools for these communities. We can tools on providing English, basic English, providing basic skills, providing basic internet skills, basic CV skills, all of these things which can help a lot of people in these communities advance. As we know, economic situation is very terrible in these points. And as we know that thanks to all of the internet, the more global world, if they acquire such skills, it is easier for them to join the online platform, the global platform, and be in a much better economic situation. I'll take second half. Extension, please. All right, then first.
Even if we grant you your benefit of education, it is not at all relevant. Like, you can't get employed with the knowledge that you get from an online diploma, and you are not solving the intrinsic problems in the Bangladeshi educational system. So really, it's much better to prioritize very vulnerable people.
Look, again, I think girls' education is an important issue. I think women's right to work is an important issue. I think women's right to vote is an important issue. And we cannot discuss those things once there's a lot of community backlash against these sites. We cannot discuss these things if parents won't allow their kids to go on these sites. And then OO tells you, oh, but look, parents don't know what kind of sites their kids go into. And then in that case, we think there are a lot of Western sites for that. There simply can be translated into the local language, which already happens in this world, which these kids can go into. The importance of this site is that it is very much supported by the community and is very much advised by the community to go into and to learn from, and thus a lot of awareness through this site. A lot of people recommend it. It has a lot of traffic, which gives it so much power. We think in tomorrow's world, once these videos are not removed, after receiving so much backlash, after the community not being able to defend these videos, so all of these benefits will go, and thus all of these skills that we so deeply want for the kids to have won't happen. Once on your side of you won't get your benefits either, because there's no way a community that doesn't even believe in sexuality will simply just accept homosexuality from 0 to 100. For all these reasons, please vote OG.
We thank the speaker for their fine speech and would like to welcome Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Can you all hear me? Okay, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to look at what happened in the PM speech and then look at the DPM speech and build up a little bit of what Julie said. So the first thing that we hear from them is like, look, Bangladesh is a very conservative and Muslim country. And so therefore, when people are like, the only metric that they say is that people are going to see this as a betrayal of their community. And this is why they're going to leave the site. And then this is bad because of it's bad because they have poor education. But like, notice that this link of betrayal is the only reason that they tell us they're going to leave the community. But I think then this is counteracted by when Julie tells you, look, these are by nature extremist people and they do not necessarily hold the views of like the majority of the population. I also think the majority of the population. I think the DPM then clears this, tries to clear this up by saying, look, when on controversial things like LGBT rights or consent or like gender equality, you're more likely to listen to the Muslim extremists than you are to this site. I don't know why that is the case though. When you presumably, if you're on this site, you've already been on this site for a while and you've been listening to these people who are telling you who are educating you on certain things, you probably then know this person, like YouTube identities, you tend to know the person and you tend to like them as a person, or like you have good associations with the site. Then I don't know then why you're necessarily going to choose that over religion specifically. So I think that's the wash. But I think then Julie's analysis also tips the balance when she says, look, you also have comparatively a lot more freedom on the internet, and also like just the fact that like the world as a whole, especially younger people, are becoming more secular, and this is something that is like quite prominent in Bangladesh. It's happening in India as well to some extent, and I think this is something that like as a global trend, young people tend to be less religious, right? So I don't understand why this betrayal of the Muslim community is the thing that happens, right? And then, yeah, why is that? And like, why would they trade off their community over like an education if they think that is what's going to be like the thing that gets them a good job in the future and things like that? I then think the PM then says, oh, look, but there are other organizations and other things to do this, like to engage with a comparative, right? I don't think there is any other viable option for promoting things like LGBT rights specifically, but also like even women's rights as well, right? Because what is the comparative, right? You're taught these things in schools. I think this is unlikely because extremist groups, even when they're a minority, can kick up a very loud fuss and make this look optically very bad for the government. So the government is likely to do something that's controversial and not implement this in schools. I think then the second thing that happens is like, oh, you can get activists to do it like they do in like Western countries mainly for LGBT groups, right? I think this is a lot more dangerous. Like they briefly mentioned, but I don't think they go into this right of like, oh, but like your safety over a social cause, right? I think if an activist goes door to door or protesting on the streets, you're much more likely to be targeted and beaten up because you're right there, and that puts you in comparatively a lot more danger. You also just reach a lot fewer people when you're in person and talking to people on the street. So first of all, yeah, it is much more, you have a significantly more danger, and you're also like, it is annoying because if someone comes to your door, you're encroaching on their space, like that is like more of a breach of privacy, while these videos are online and you're not forced to watch them. And then I also think that like you just reach less people, so neither of these are nearly as efficacious as these videos. I think these videos also are specifically important because like, look, the people who made these videos either did it for one of two reasons. Either they themselves like fundamentally believe in these ideas and want to share them, right? So therefore they should be able to like put them up because they made them, so presumably they should just keep up like as a principle. But second of all, the other reason they might have made them is because you often get requests for things like this. When you have like a popular channel and you educate people about certain ideas, you often request. So this means it is likely that these videos were made by popular demand, right? I think that is very crucially important as to why they stay up, right? Looking them at the DPM stuff, I think they also talk about like, oh, but like the Muslim, like Bangladesh as a whole is a very like a Muslim and conservative country, right? But I think like, if you just look at how, if we are just thinking about like what makes countries more tolerant and socially liberal in terms of like both women and LGBT rights, it is by things of just, first of all, you need to be aware of like these people exist, or aware that this is an issue that isn't just like one opinion is correct. You need to know that there are there are different options out there like to be embraced within the world, right? I think this is what what these videos do. But then second of all, quite importantly, it has to be a positive association. I think at the point that you've been watching these videos as opening government characterizes on your way to school or for a long while to teach you life skills, and they've been useful and you associate good things with them, then when you see that person also telling you, that is like going to make it more likely for you to start a conversation or think these things are accepted. But even if it is not, like even if you specifically don't watch these videos, I think if an extremist, I think then like other people are watching these videos, and that brings it into the public conversation. I think when people talk about it a lot, that is how things are normalized, and that is how social right movements work and tend to progress. I'll take a point from closing if they have one. Opening?
Yeah. Where do you think that we are able to get more economic liberation in the long run?
Like economic liberation. Yeah, okay. So like, yeah, so opening government then also talks about like the fact that, oh, but like women are oppressed minority, so it's very specifically important for them to have a good education because they are at a disadvantage when it comes to things like employment. But look, I think even if this site is useful and people like and enjoy watching the videos on the site, I think because like Bangladesh does have an education system, I think it is unlikely that the videos on this site are going to be the delta and the thing that makes that person's life go from like working in like a farm, for example, to working in like a corporate office in the capital. I don't know why these videos in particular, like the educational ones, are going to be the ones that do this in particular. However, I do think that it is these videos in such a conservative Muslim country, which when you are like an oppressed woman or an oppressed LGBT teen or child, and you see these videos, are going to be one of the things that change your life dramatically, because as they frame it is like largely like not largely talked about. So when you see someone talking about it, I think that is something that is drastically going to like lift you out of maybe depression or despair and make you feel less alone. I think that change in an individual's life is far bigger than like the educational ones, although I think they exist and they're good and something that the service with rights. I don't think it's the only one. I think they then talk about like, oh, but sexuality and rights are never discussed at all. And I think it is better to discuss gender equality. Like on the info slide, it also said things on consent and gender equality were also had to be taken down. But I also think that like they give us no other option or give us no other viable comparative as to how like you're going to spread these idea of pro-women and pro-LGBT messages, right? Because I think I've outlined the other two major things that get things socially accepted, which is the government and activists, and why those are not viable. I think that like then for them to just say, oh, look, it's just too Muslim and too conservative of the world. I think you need to remember, like even the West, like though it is imperfect, was a very, very Christian state. And like even things like in the Bible, like it has subtext and explicit text, which suggests like how women should be subservient and stuff. I think even then it is up to interpretation. I think then like as religious leaders, as Julie points out, become less relevant in maybe a community, and like your school and your education, because that is the scene to actually take you forward in life rather than your religion, becomes more important within a person's life. I think that is when you begin to get these progressions. And I think there is always hope, even for deeply religious countries like India, which is very Hindu, or like the US, which is incredibly Christian. I then think that like, sorry, yeah, that I'm out of time. Proud to oppose.
We thank the speaker for their fine speech. And now to start the second half, like good? You're good? Yeah, okay. Now I would like to invite the member of government. Here.
Take a look at that. There's a thing going around. No, obviously everybody be healthy and take care of yourself. Obviously, okay. 3, 2, 1. Panel, our case is quite straightforward. Firstly, the pro-LGBT, pro-liberal values video has little impact, but does prevent you access from the website at large, and specifically prevents you access from educational content that is massively beneficial to you. We recognize that OG start this. We are going to do much deeper work. Simply for like comprehension, I'm going to refer to like the pro-LGBTQ kind of videos as advocacy, and the second kind, like the basic life skills, sort of as education, just so we are on the same page. So all rebuttal will be integrated. Let's talk about why we think there's a low impact to this advocacy video. So we get from several attacks on that, specifically from the side of, well, it's only the extremists, the fundamentalists that take a hard stance on that. Sorry, there's a barking dog. And we don't think they have much impact, but we think that they do. We think that these fundamentalists actually get to dictate for the rest of the society the tone of what it actually means to be religious, what it actually means to be Muslim, and therefore create a stronger narrative socially and impact a lot of the society, right? First of all, why? They're closer to the original text, unfortunately, right? We think that religions that are uncompromising, that are sort of more fundamentalist, the more thorough, are the ones that prevail to a longer time. We think, therefore, that the original text is likely to be less compromising as we have in status quo, right? We think it also means that their interpretation of that text is more readily available, is more clear as true as in representing the word of God, and therefore they're more able to convince on that. Also, they are way more emotionally fired up about that sort of about these religious interests, right? They have the intensity of preference that is the most intense, right? Therefore, in a public discussion about things where they mark a specific thing, like a specific narrative, as harmful to them, as infringing on their rights, as massively against what it means to be Muslim, they're likely to take over this discussion. They're likely to be like seated ground by more moderate factors, by people who are like, okay, this means so much to you, and you get to say what that means, right? Note that OO agree with us in their DLO speech when they note how much these people have an influence on the government and on the society at large, right? Also note, these people are likely to have access to more available resources, like actually sermons in a more prominent mosque, but also actually funding from their more fundamental adherents from even out of state, like Saudi Arabia, that seems to fund more and more extreme interpretations of the text. That means they get to say what it means to, if you want to engage with your identity as a Muslim, even you're a moderate in a society, which is something that is massively important to you as a person, you need to listen to these hardliners. You need to say, okay, I'm going to do that as they say, because that's what it means to be Muslim, right? Specifically, this wins over the assertion from OO that the youth are liberal, right? We think that is more of an analysis on that front, right? Note, that's also true for LGBT and the young and the women themselves, but also to their family and connection, right? To the people who are dear to them that will make you disengage with that platform, right? Because say there's a limit to how much they can look over their shoulders. First of all, unfortunately, we don't think that's true. We think when you are under like a crushing poverty, there is a limit to how much private area you have, so people are likely to see you. But it's not only about catching you in the act, right? There's going to be some table talk of, have you heard about this terrible thing? They're going against our identity. Are you with us? Are you on our side? Are you part of this family? Are you part of this identity, this shared identity between us? That's a massive amount of fear and social pressure enacted on these youth, enacted on these people, and a fear of rejection. Note that the advantages of watching these videos is potential and futuristic, right? You're maybe going to benefit from that someday, but losing your connections, your safety net, your family is right here, right now. The bottom line of that is likely that you'll stop engagement with those videos, and even if you don't, the stronger social narratives against them will make you less convinced by them, so the benefits from op don't stand. Let's talk about now about benefits that you don't accrue when you need to disengage with these videos, specifically education that will enable your life. Let's again extend over OG. Let's talk about how, and therefore achieve economic liberation, right? Let's talk about how the video, the educational video, gets you a job. Let's talk about the economics of Bangladesh, because right now they are mostly based on like textile factories and developing economies around this sort of thing. Also factories that of assembly for electronic parts, that things that require basic comprehension of English and mathematics and things like that, and similar manufacturing, and also telephonic service and QA for Western firms. All of these require access to English and math and basic political rights like unionizing that is critical in getting a job in these sort of things, right? And getting by that financial incentive, right? Also, they're fairly easy to learn because you do need the basic skill there, so you are able to get that from these educational videos. That means you're able to get more money and simply improve your life from that crushing poverty, which in of itself we think is a huge gain for everybody, but specifically for those weakest in society that we want to help. And before I continue on that, let's take CG. No, where's CG? CEO.
The video has already been put up. That means that citizens who are going to boycott this will boycott on both sides of the house, because even after you take the video down, you will still believe that this school is ideologically opposed to you.
We simply don't believe that's true, right? We think that you get way less like vandalization of advertisements, so people will still go there. We think that reduces the governmental pressure that these people will enact because they have no reason to do that anymore. We simply don't believe that's true. So we disagree with that. Let's talk about how independence happens, right? Because we think that people that we want to defend, like the LGBTQ youth and women, are tied to their families and communities through economic ties, right? They need to stay at home and help their families because they don't have any other choice. The youth that wants to leave their family, like maybe the rural community, and go to the city that might be more liberal, can't do that because they don't have the funds. But now they do. Now they can go out into the world, live their life to the best of their ability, and gain much more. Like they get economically, they get out of this society, this environment, and get a much better response. Even if you're still at home and you only travel to work in transportation, or you talk to people in your factory, that in itself enables you to create a disparate social safety nets as people who can help you and listen to you and talk to you, and that in of itself grants you more autonomy and more ability to act as yourself in the world, which is in the end what we want for these people. For all these reasons, very proud to propose.
We thank the speaker for their